From white sand beaches to ice-capped mountains, and from volcanic Pacific islands to the most remote corners of the Earth, some places aren't just stunning, they could save your life when World War III kicks off. But before you book a one-way ticket to Antarctica and plan to ride it out with the penguins, here are the safest places to be when the bombs start to fall. As tensions continue to rise across the globe, it's starting to feel like World War III isn't a question of if, but when. US relations with, well, pretty much everyone, have soured. Russia is still dragging out its three-day special military operation years later, and China is flexing its muscles around Taiwan. Meanwhile, the Middle East remains a volatile flashpoint, with rising hostilities threatening to draw in major powers. With diplomacy on life support, the world is sliding toward catastrophe. And in a war that big, survival might depend entirely on where you are. The white sand beaches of Fiji might sound like the perfect vacation getaway, but when the bombs start to fall, what makes it worth hiding out there? For starters, it's far from the front lines. Take out a map and look at all the treaty allies of the United States. They tend to skirt around the periphery of the Eurasian landmass, the interior of which is more or less aligned with Russia and China. Now look at the joints between the two. If you're in East Asia or the Pacific region, you'll first want to get away from the countries along what geostrategists call the first island chain, which goes from Japan to the Indonesian archipelago. The most intense battles in this theater would take place there, because this is the first line of defense for the US and its allies to contain China's military aims. China has to break through this barrier to secure its trade and supply lines, let alone get all it wants out of World War III. But the hostilities would reach further, thanks to China's large arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles. Guam and even Hawaii would be huge targets because they're bases for the US military. Even the US mainland would be attacked in some way. Oh, and get away from the Korean peninsula too, for obvious reasons. But Fiji is far from the front lines and far down on the list of targets. Although it has close ties to Washington, no one would bet an eye if Suva declared its neutrality, at least at first. After all, its military only has about 4,000 individuals with a reserve force of 6,000 personnel. In terms of distance, Australia is the closest of the belligerent powers, and it's almost 2,900 miles, 4,667 kilometers away. So you have distance on your side. That's one major World War III survival category that Fiji fulfills. What about the other? You'd have plenty to survive on out here. Fiji has about 300 islands in its total territory, so you can cruise around and enjoy catching the abundant fish. Fishermen catch over 36,000 tons of them every year, and there are over 1,300 species in Fiji's fisheries to choose from. But if you do get tired of seafood, Fiji has almost 77,000 hectares of arable land, and it grows some pretty diverse stuff. Common crops include bananas, potatoes, coconuts, pineapples, and kava. The Fijians also like to take the root from this plant and make it into a recreational drink similar to alcohol. Parts of the country get enough rainfall to support plenty of poultry, pigs, and cattle. Also, there's a whole lot of sugarcane and even chocolate to satisfy even the sweetest of teeth. And Fiji doesn't have resources that a belligerent great power would be interested in, at least at first. That phrase might have tipped you off to something. Fiji isn't foolproof as a hiding place, so don't get comfortable in that hammock just yet. If the war ended in short order, it likely wouldn't see much action, but the unpredictability of a long war means Fiji will have some drawbacks. Take another look at the first island chain. If the United States and its allies win there, you probably won't have much to worry about. But if China, North Korea, and whatever allies they can call on manage to break through at least part of this line, Fiji is getting closer to the danger zone. Further east from Japan is the second island chain, and the next stop along the way is the third island chain from the Aleutians in Alaska down to New Zealand. The US and its allies would retreat here to keep China further at bay if things went really poorly, and that line runs right through parts of Fiji. And if the war gets messy, by World War III standards, there are some things in Fiji that could prove useful after all to a warring power under extreme stress. Things like timber, precious metals, and copper, plus the potential for offshore oil in Fiji's exclusive economic zone. So Fiji's pretty safe. But after hearing that, you might want a tropical getaway that could be even safer. How about Tuvalu? It's 1,000 miles 1,609 kilometers to the north, so it'll be even further away from any major battleground, at least in the war's opening phase. It also has most of the other things you could want on a World War III survival list. Like Fiji, it doesn't have any treaty alliances, so it's likely that no one would mind too much if it suddenly made like Switzerland and declared neutrality, especially because it only has a population of 10,000 people and a total area of about 10 square miles 25 square kilometers, good for 192nd in the world. The place is densely packed, though, at just under 1,100 people per square mile for 123 per square kilometer. So you better make sure you get along with your new neighbors. And if you can, there's plenty to sustain you here. As you might have guessed, there's a lot of fish to go around in Tuvalu. 42% of the country's people are directly involved in the fishing industry. Its exclusive economic zone at sea is 34,000 times larger than its land area, so there are plenty of places for you to go cast your lines. Tuna species represent 90% of the total catch, but there are 194 species in total. On land, coconuts are plentiful, but since there's fewer natural resources to go around than on Fiji, your diet probably won't be as diverse. We'll let you decide whether it's more important to have a little more safety in exchange for a more routine plate on your table. At least you won't ever have to worry about running out of fresh water. And fewer resources means even less of a reason for the warring powers to take an interest in this place. But even Tuvalu isn't completely off the annihilation chessboard. Its geography and political ties could put it in harm's way if things get messy. Though it's not a formal ally, it maintains close relationships with the United States and Australia. It's also one of the few countries that still recognize Taiwan over the People's Republic of China, something that definitely doesn't sit well with Beijing. It's also just past the second island chain, so it's a bit of a weather vane for how the war as a whole would be going. If Tuvalu stays as it is now, the strategy to contain China is probably working. If Chinese planes are a routine sight in the skies and ships are moving around offshore, it's a sign that you should book a flight to somewhere else. The last thing you'd want to be is trapped behind Chinese lines in World War III. If Chinese hardware becomes a routine sight near Tuvalu, you can try retreating further south, to the end of the second island chain in New Zealand. On paper, this looks like it wouldn't be such a great choice. Aside from being in the island chain, New Zealand is a treaty ally of the United States. Even so, the country isn't likely to be a major player in the war. It has a small military at only about 15,000 people, according to its parliament. Even under wartime stresses, it wouldn't be able to contribute a whole lot more. Its total population is only a little over 5 million people, with about 1.8 million considered fit for military service and 62,000 reaching military age every year. Sure, New Zealand could see a missile or two coming its way in the event of a full mobilization. But if we were China or North Korea, we would want to use those on more important targets. We'll explain more on that in a moment. It might sound strange, but the American homeland is more likely to get hit by those missiles than New Zealand is. Geography gives New Zealand some critical advantages. It's over 1,000 miles 1,609 kilometers southeast of Australia, putting it far from most conflict zones. Strategically, its only real military value would be as a point to cut off supply lines between the United States and Australia, something the Japanese attempted in World War II, but even they couldn't reach this far. China has even less experience projecting power at such colossal distances, so we're betting that New Zealand won't be a high priority target even if the war goes to their liking. So, New Zealand passes the first test, despite its likely belligerent status. What about survival? The first thing you should do is look at the sheep. New Zealand is a country of sheep. Literally. In 2022, there were 25.3 million sheep in the country, about 5 sheep for every person. That's the lowest ratio in 170 years. But who's counting sheep during World War III? There's more important things to worry about, like mutually assured destruction. The abundant sheep mean there's a ready protein source for you to survive on, but it's not just about the food you eat. World War III would disrupt global supply chains, and by disrupt, we mean completely blow up. But at least you will have clothes on your back. And unless sheep become a strategic military target, You'll have a lot of wool to make textiles with. The sheep are just part of a sprawling agricultural sector too. New Zealand is self-sufficient when it comes to food production. However, in 2022, only 2% of New Zealand's total territory was arable land. If you can't stomach eating those cute little sheep, you don't need to worry. The farms here produce things like oats, wheat, barley, corn, peas, lentils, canola, and clovers. New Zealand is also an island nation, which means there's a lot of fish for you to catch too. You can enjoy the abundance of kingfish, snapper, yellowfin tuna, chinook salmon, and too many others to name. So what would the drawbacks be? Aside from it being involved in the network of alliances that helped lead to this catastrophe, New Zealand has resources that a warring power would want. There's gold, silver, coal, oil, natural gas, iron ore, and so on. It's likely that a victorious China would demand these in the form of tribute rather than spend its own resources occupying a country as far away as New Zealand, but stranger things have happened. Still, when it comes to the Pacific region, this is probably the safest and most comfortable place for you to be. But it's called a World War III for a reason. Emphasis on the word world. With Russia also involved, all of Eastern Europe between the Baltic and the Black Sea would be a major battleground. Anywhere east of Germany would be in huge danger, and just retreating to the west isn't an answer. Take out a map of Europe and you'll notice a geographical feature that would be of major importance for this war, as it's been for too many other wars in Europe to name. There's a huge stretch of open land that spans most of the continent's length, from the Pyrenees to the Urals. That's the European plain, and the further east you go, the more open the plain gets. At the Urals, it spans 1,200 miles 1,931 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Putin hates this, like every Russian dictator has before him. It means Russia has borders that are pretty much impossible to defend, which is kind of a problem in a war. Since geography is destiny, one of Putin's top World War III goals would be to extend Russian influence as far west as he can. Now, since Russia's military can't even go far west in Ukraine, we wouldn't blame you for doubting that Putin would be able to get a reconstruction of the Soviet Union out of this. But we've already seen how he makes up for these shortcomings. Every major city in Europe would be a target for his missiles and drones. The further east you are, the likelier you'd be to get hit. But it would be a bad idea to count yourself as being safe if you're in London, Paris, or even Madrid. Sure, you can flee to the countryside, but any place in NATO would potentially be a target, especially if there's a military base nearby. Even the east coast of the United States would be a target, or the American heartland for that matter. Russia has decades of experience in choosing potential targets to hit with ballistic missiles in the continental United States. Intercontinental ballistic missiles don't really care about Arctic ice. Most of Europe and the North Atlantic would be unsafe. But what about Iceland? Yes, it's part of NATO, but there's not much it can contribute to the alliance. It doesn't have a standing army or navy. The most it has is a coast guard with small arms, artillery, and air defense radar stations. In fact, Iceland as we know it hasn't ever participated in a war. It has stayed neutral for a millennium, probably because that was the only way such a tiny country could survive. When it took part in NATO's operations in Afghanistan, it was mostly in APR capacity, not a military one. As far as targets go, this isn't a place that's likely to attract much of Putin's attention. And there's a lot to survive with here. You might have guessed this by now, but Iceland has a lot of fish for you to eat. Fishing was the backbone of its economy from the 9th to the 20th centuries, and it still directly makes up 11% of the country's GDP and almost 39% of its exports. Over 1.1 million tons of fish were caught in 2021. While the missiles are flying overhead elsewhere, you can enjoy the fireworks with some Atlantic salmon, Atlantic cod, various kinds of halibut, and a whole lot more. And here's the really great thing. You won't need to rely on imported energy to cook that fish within this world full of blown-up supply chains. Iceland is an energy self-sufficient country. 70% of its energy comes from its hydroelectric power plants, and the other 30% comes from geothermal sources. 90% of the country's households are heated with geothermal water. The country's only energy vulnerability is that it needs to import fossil fuels to use for transport, but that's changing quickly. Iceland is adopting electric cars faster than almost any other country. 85% of the cars sold in Iceland in the first half of 2022 were electric. That was up from the 60% seen in 2021 and the 46% seen in 2020. So hopefully by World War III, you'll just be able to plug a car into that geothermal energy grid and soon move along to the next lake to catch your big fish. So what are the drawbacks when it comes to Iceland? One of them is that even though the island itself is mostly safe, there would be one particular area of interest for Russia. Go to the Reykjanes Peninsula in southwestern Iceland. At the bottom of it, you'll find a very important US military base. That's the Naval Air Station Keflavik, and in 2019, something peculiar happened there. A B-2 Spirit bomber visited this place for the first time. It was just a brief pit stop, but it was a sign of things to come. Iceland had become important again. The recent Operation Midnight Hammer against Iran's nuclear sites revealed just how powerful a fleet of stealth bombers could be. There are only a few places in the world that can host the B-2 for long periods because it needs special climate-controlled hangars. As fate would have it, this base is probably one of them. By 2021, the B-2 was making extended visits to Keflavik. The B-21 Raider bomber will likely be making visits to in the coming years, so you can be sure that Keflavik would be a high-priority target for a missile attack. But if you stay away from there, Iceland is a good bet. Just make sure your electric car is charged. You'll want a fast getaway from the southwest before the missiles begin to fall. Or maybe you can do what Eric the Red did back in the late 10th century and head west to an even safer place. You'll quickly find that Greenland isn't really green since 80% of it is covered in ice. It's the real Iceland if there ever was one. Average winter temperatures here get to -0 degrees Fahrenheit 18 Celsius on the thermometer, with some places going as low as -58.50 Celsius. Yeah, it won't be pleasant, but that's exactly the point because it's unlikely that anyone would fight too hard for a place that's 80% ice. But living in a war zone is probably more unpleasant. Since the vast majority of the people in Greenland live on the southwest part of the island, there's not a whole lot in its interior, which means there aren't many roads in this part of the world. There are only 93 total miles, 150 kilometers of roads in the entire country, and only 56 miles, 90 kilometers are paved. No two communities in Greenland are connected by road. Even the capital, Nuuk, has only 2 traffic lights. That might sound like a hassle, but the point is that targeting Greenland is probably going to be much more trouble than it's worth for any great power at war. Occupying such a place would require a lot of investment. And despite its remoteness, Greenland has many advantages when it comes to survival. It can be completely energy self-sufficient. Its power plants can produce 545 million kilowatt-hours while Greenlanders consume 534.5 million annually. And yes, there's a lot of fish around to eat. The fishing industry makes up about 90% of Greenland's total exports. You can try some of the local halibut, salmon, prawns, cod, crab, and scallops, just to name a few. Common crops include potatoes, tomatoes, cucumbers, cabbage, and the Greenlanders are even experimenting with strawberries. Like New Zealand, there are a lot of sheep around here, too. Even if the fish are enough meat for you, those wool textiles will come in handy when it gets cold, and that's definitely going to happen. Yeah, Greenland would technically be one of the belligerent powers if NATO's Article 5 gets triggered. As an autonomous region of Denmark, it's a member of the alliance, but there's only one US military installation on Greenland. It's Pituffik Space Base in the northwest part of the island. The base has some valuable things like a 10,000-foot 3,048-meter runway that handles over 3,000 international flights a year and a ballistic missile early warning system. But even if this place proves to be a target, as long as you stay far away from it, the rest of the island is safe. In fact, on the day World War III starts, Greenland might just be the safest place for you in the entire world. But before you start hastily packing your Arctic gear and fleeing north, there is something you should be aware of. Consider it a longer-term risk. To see what we mean, look at a map as you get closer to the Arctic Ocean. You'll notice an almost perfectly diagonal line between Greenland and the United Kingdom, with Iceland right in the middle and Greenland on the left flank. That's the line geographers call the GI-UK gap. This line was very important in the Cold War, and it could well be again. To see why, look at it from Russia's perspective. Go further east on your map, to the Russian port of Murmansk. and you'll see one of the many problems with that country's geography. To break out into the open ocean, Russia would need to cross the GIUK line. It's sort of like the first island chain for this part of the world. NATO would want to keep Russia behind that line. Russia would want to get through it and move on down the Atlantic. If things go well enough in Europe, Russian ships might find Iceland and Greenland enticing. Breaking through the GIUK gap would mean safer supply lines and better positioning for its ships and submarines to threaten other NATO members, including the continental United States. Mind you, we don't think this is a very likely possibility. The Russian Navy is a floating disaster. Just look at what Ukraine did to it in the Black Sea, even though it has no navy. Fighting against NATO's combined naval might so far from its shores isn't something it would likely be good at. So you can consider it a low risk, but we just want to inform you about all the potential risks, because we're concerned about your safety. There's one more thing about Greenland that's worth taking note of. You've undoubtedly heard about Donald Trump's desire to purchase the island. He says it's vital for America's national security, and it's not just about the GIUK gap. It's more about the ice. This place might actually live up to its name soon. It has an average thickness of 1.4 miles to 0.3 kilometers, but it's melting fast. Between 2002 and 2021, melting ice caused global sea levels to rise by around 0.03 inches, 0.8 millimeters per year. That's 280 gigatons worth every 12 months. And there's a lot of stuff that a warring power would be very interested in buried underneath that ice. There's coal, oil, and natural gas for energy. There's uranium for nuclear materials, thorium for potential next-gen nuclear power plants, lithium for batteries, and rare earth elements that are vital for modern electronic technology like the device you're watching this video on. That also includes military gear. By the way, good luck building sonars or jet engines without them. If you're keeping this in mind as you make your World War III escape plans, you might want to stay away from the town of Narsec. It's estimated to hold a whopping 25% of the world's total rare earth reserves. In 2022, investors estimated the value of Greenland's rare earths at $320 billion, but that number is only going to grow as the ice melts and demand soars. So when it comes to Greenland, the risk profile probably increases over time, though it will still be much safer than almost anywhere else. But are you doomed to frost if you live in the Western Hemisphere? You might be jealous that your counterparts in the East get to go to places like tropical Fiji and Tuvalu, or even in a much more inviting place like New Zealand, while you're stuck shivering when it's 30 below 34 degrees Celsius outside. Well, you're in luck. There's a place deep in the Atlantic and much further south that could be the perfect destination for you. Nowhere in mainland Europe would be safe in World War III, but as you might have guessed, there are autonomous territories far away that have a much reduced risk profile. The Azores is one of them. These islands are an autonomous region of Portugal, 870 miles 1,400 kilometers west of Lisbon. The climate here is nice and mild thanks to the Gulf Stream, with typical temperatures in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit, 17 to 26 Celsius year-round. Since Portugal is part of NATO, the Azores would technically be a warring territory, but since it's far off Europe and far behind the GIUK gap, it's pretty safe on the whole. Food. Your typical plate here probably won't be what you expect. Unsurprisingly, there's tuna to go around, but the Azores fishing industry is surprisingly small because the ecosystem is fragile. A European Union report from 2015 mentioned that between 13,000 and 15,000 tons are caught annually, employment enough only for 500 people. That might not sound like a lot compared to what you've seen elsewhere, but if you're just trying to survive, it's probably enough. Fortunately, there's something to make up for it. There's a lot of volcanic activity in the Azores. There are 26 active volcanoes here, 8 of which lie beneath the surface. The only island in the archipelago that doesn't have a volcano is Santa Maria, but the frequency of volcanic activity also means that the soil here is extremely nutritious. Combine that with the Mediterranean to subtropical climate, and you have a place that's fantastic for growing crops. You'll find bananas, pineapples, yams, potatoes, including sweet potatoes, tomatoes, cereals, and even tea. There's also a strong dairy sector here, and aside from cows, there's pigs, poultry, goats, and sheep. Your diet would be well balanced here. Sounds like a great place in any setting. In World War III, it sounds positively fantastic. So what would be one of the downsides? If you plan on staying here, you'll need to be mindful of an important US military base. That's Lichfield on Terceira Island, 9.3 miles 15 kilometers northeast of the town of Angra do Heroísmo. There are about 600 personnel from the US Department of Defense at Lives, and it's an important staging point for NATO operations across the Atlantic. It hosts C-17 transport aircraft and the KC-46 Pegasus, the latest refueling aircraft in the USAF's fleet. Lives played an important role in Operation Desert Storm, and with stuff like that around, it would be in any wider war in Europe or the Middle East. You can bet that Lives would be a target for Russian missiles. Stay away from there, though, and there's not much else of interest for a warring power except for timber. Even if Russia broke through the geopolitical gap in a bizarre alternate universe, its ships wouldn't see much reason to stop here. There are other European territories on the high seas. Further south lie the Canary Islands, which are part of Spain. In terms of climate, this might be the best place in the world. Hey, one of the major tourist sites says so. So it must be true, right? If you like soaking up the sun, preferably with some sunscreen on, you can't go wrong here. The Canaries get 3,000 hours of sunlight a year, more than any other place in Europe. Typical temperatures are in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit 17 to 6 Celsius year-round. But what can you survive on out here? The Canaries grow more bananas than you'll ever want to eat. Over half of the bananas eaten in Europe come from here. There are also potatoes, tomatoes, cucumbers, green beans, and vineyards if you don't want to give up your wine or if you just want to eat grapes. You can also try some of the world's most renowned goat cheese, the mozzarella. It comes from the island of Fuerteventura, which is arid and volcanic, but perfect for goat pasture. They are at producing poultry too, and the island of Tenerife has more fishing guilds than any other place in Spain. That's because the Canaries are known for their big game fish. You can enjoy the local tuna, mackerel, fentax, and marlin. You're supposed to throw the blue marlin at the end of your line back, but that's today. If World War III breaks out, things might change and at least you know it's available. So what might be the downsides? Spain is part of NATO, and while there's no US-owned military base in the Canaries, there is a Spanish Air Force base. That's Gando Air Base on Gran Canaria, which sees regular activity from the US military. Aircraft like the C-17 Globemaster III are frequent visitors here, so Gando is another important site for NATO's transatlantic logistics. Stay away from there, and there's not much else of interest for a warring power except for timber. Even if Russia broke through the geopolitical gap in a bizarre alternate universe, its ships wouldn't see much reason to stop here. There are other European territories on the high seas. Further south lie the Canary Islands, which are part of Spain. So what might be the drawbacks? Well, South Africa and Cape Town in particular were once strategic hotspots. Before the Suez Canal opened in 1869, the Cape of Good Hope was the way for ships to get between Europe and Asia. Disruptions up north will see increased traffic, which could lead to trouble. We've already seen a dress rehearsal with Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, but the more specific danger would have nothing to do with the war. South Africa has a high crime rate. There are about 58.9 for crimes per 100,000 people in this country, and a murder rate of 30 for per 100,000 people. In terms of violent crime, it's ranked the third most dangerous country in the world. The power supply also probably won't be as reliable as a place like Iceland. The national power utility, a company called Escom, has failed to meet demand since 2007. That means periodic power outages, including up to 12 hours in some places during 2023. It would be even worse in World War III. But if you pick the right spot in Cape Town, you would still be in less danger than you would thousands of miles to the north. So far, we've only talked about old world hiding spots. What about the new world? The United States would be targeted, so hiding out here isn't an option anymore. South America is a good bet, though. No country here is likely to be dragged into World War III, at least for now. But there are other considerations. You certainly wouldn't want to hide out in Venezuela, with its corrupt dictator, Nicolas Maduro. You'd also need to consider crime rates. They can be very high in places. Chile is not one of them. There are about 37.55 crimes per 1,000 people in Chile. That's elevated compared to other parts of the world, but it's 10% lower than the United States. Better, there are only 1.7 murders per 100,000 people here, compared to 5 in the United States. Want some other positives? Chile and the United States are generally aligned. There's even a joint base, the Fort Aguayo Naval Base in Cancun, but it's a training facility for peacekeeping exercises, not a valuable military target. What's more, Chile's geography makes it almost perfectly suited for surviving World War III. Its coastline of almost 4,000 miles, 6,437 kilometers, is at the southwestern edge of South America. It's almost impossibly far away for any of the major warring powers to reach. The profile gets even better. Chile is sort of like a much more modest version of South Korea. It's emerged from a checkered history of coups and dictatorships to be a vibrant democracy, and corruption here is fairly low. It's ranked 32nd out of 180 on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. That's higher than any other country in South America except Uruguay, and only 4 spots lower than the United States. Chile is also a fairly well-developed country, with a GDP per capita of $16,700 in 2024, high by the standards of its region. Higher than China, too, for that matter. What can you survive on out here? Plenty of fruit, like grapes, apples, and kiwi fruit. There's also wheat, corn, potatoes, and tomatoes, and Chile is one of the world's biggest exporters of ultra-nutritious blueberries. Cherries, too. Onions and wheat are also staples. Here's where Chile's extreme geography gives it another advantage. It can be so forbidding that common agricultural pests simply aren't a factor, so its farms are always productive. If you're looking for meat, other exported items include poultry, pork, and salmon. And Chile's long coastline pretty much guarantees an abundance of fish, over 813 species available for small-time fish. Ours to go and catch. The downsides: Chile's fisheries aren't what they once were. Overfishing has led to tighter regulations, which would probably be more important to follow in World War III. Chile also relies on imported energy. It's trying to take steps to be energy independent, with renewables making up 55.3% of its power generation in 2022, but it's not Iceland yet. The following year, it imported 60.3% of its total energy supply. You can live with blackouts, but Chile is also a net food importer. Chile does a really good job with the territory it has, but you can't overthrow nature. In 2022, only 1.7% of the country's territory was arable land. But the game is survival here. With global supply chains up in smoke, the import-export math will change as Chile wisely hoards what it has to itself. With the South American continent most likely to be untouched, markets should do the rest. So you can probably feel good about your choice to spend World War III at a place like Punta Arenas, the world's southernmost city with 100,000 inhabitants. There's sheep and cattle to go by here too, just in case you were worried. So sit back and relax on this gateway to the Antarctic, thousands of miles away from the bombs and the rockets and the bullets, as long as they're not nuclear. That is, in a nuclear winter, you wouldn't be safe no matter how remote a place you could find. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on Quest Mode.